Hello everyone! Let's take a look at the Groom Hair components that come as part of the new Metahuman Creator plugin that we get in Unreal Engine 5.6. The preview edition comes with a ton of hair and also an incredible shader that I'm going to show you and all the funky bits and pieces that you can go and adjust with it. So some of it doesn't quite work, it's very beta still, but the stuff that does work looks pretty awesome. So let's take a look how this works. I've got a more or less default Metahuman in here. I was going to use the previous one that we used, but sadly to make changes to Metahuman that already exists, you have to go and remove the face rig and then re-rig it once you've made all the changes. Now sadly, there's of course a bug in the preview version that means most times when you try that, Unreal Engine crashes. Sometimes it works, but most times it does not. So I just created a new guy here. And I've also given him some clothing. I'll have a look at where that is. There's only this outfit and it doesn't deform, so that's probably something else that they're going to work on right now. But for now, let's go to this tab here, hair and clothing editing tools. When you click it, you've got these two sections here, selection and details. Details is where we're going to tweak the shader, the material, and selection is where the actual asset is that you're going to apply. So click on that, and these are the hair assets here. In fact, there's sections. This top one here says hair grooms, that's for the top of your head. Then the next one is eyebrows. You can have different eyebrows here, so I'll go and collapse that as well. Don't worry, they're all going to reopen in a minute. Then we have the eyelashes, so there's different types of eyelashes that you can use. Then there's the mustache groom, so that's for here. And then there is the beard grooms, that's for the rest of the face here. And then we have another one which is peach fuzz. Peach fuzz is that really fluffy hair that everybody has, no matter if you're clean shaven or not, that even women have, and it's just all over the place. It was released together with one of the Genesis figures as well. And then last but not least, we have this clothing option here. So that is what I've put on my man here, but it doesn't deform, so it doesn't get rigged. There's a ton of poke through. I'm just going to leave it on here, but that is that asset here. So we're going to leave all the other bits and pieces alone and just focus on the head hair. Now, technically, there should probably be thumbnails on everything, but when you open it, they're all going to look like this, so there's no thumbnails. If you double click an asset, like the first one here, you will have the thumbnail rendered by the time you click on the second asset. So that's probably also going to change. It takes a moment here. When you do that, Unreal Engine loads the groom and also creates the binding asset that it needs for this particular character here. Most of the hairs don't actually work. So the first one works. This is the afro here. The second one does not work. So if you click on it, Unreal Engine seems to do something in the background, but it doesn't really work. So that's a bit of a shame. But click through them. The afro works. None of these work as well. They get thumbnails at least. The mohawk works here. We're going to go and have a look at that as well. And then the receding hair also works, but those are the only three that I've discovered that actually work. Most of the other ones, like here, this is the mohawk now. And see how it wiggles when you load it in? So very, very cool. Sadly, there's no long hairs that work right now. And then this one here, the receding hair, that also works. Yeah, so I think we're going to stick with the mohawk, with the Mohican here probably, because I can show you the shader features there. Very nice, look at that. And this is with the base shader that we get here. And we can make tons of changes to that. Now, one thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that you don't have to use this environment that we currently see here. If you go up to Studio here, you have a lot of other bits and pieces that you can choose, and you also have the light rig rotation. So if you want to see this from a different angle, you can totally do that. So you can just go and switch that around and pick a different high key, low key lighting environment there. So that's very, very nice. So sometimes it's important when you design your hair that you check how does it react to reflections and all, because I'm just bringing that up because I've just finished playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Very nice game, and they have a good hair shader in that game as well. They also have something along these lines. I mean, they don't use Unreal Engine, but of course the principles for the hair shader are pretty much the same. And what's interesting is that depending on the outdoor lighting situation, you could see that the hair was almost appears completely white, and of course it wasn't that. It's just that the reflection of the hair shader was so much that it was almost difficult to reflect any of the color there. So just one of those things, keep it in mind. If the hair looks good like that, it might not look good like that or in a different lighting condition. But I will stick with the first one here and go and give us something like that. So half in the shadow, half in the sun, so we can have a look at that. Now let's go back to selection here, and I'll go and grab the Mohican. And then we'll play around with the shader. That's on the details tab here. When you click on it, you'll see this overwhelming list of stuff. And it depends on what other groom components you've got attached. I've only got the top hair here. So I've only got this one section that says the mohawk binding hair. But if you had eyelashes and eyebrows, make sure you close those down and only open the ones that you want to work on. So I'll open mine here, and the first parameter that we have is melanin. And I don't know how familiar you are with hair in real life, but melanin is the pigment that is in our hair. A lot of melanin means our hair is dark, and no melanin as we get older means our hair becomes white, so there's no color in the hair. I think in humans there's actually two types of pigments, one that makes sort of brunette hair and one that makes the lighter tones like the blonde hairs, but we don't have that here. Instead we have a redness factor that basically means the more we drag that in, we have a bit more of a ginger hair here. Slider doesn't update automatically, so you have to left click and drag or type in a number and then you see the effect. Or we drag to the other side to 0 and then we don't have that reddish tint at all. Usually most of us have a little bit of that in there, whether we're completely ginger or not, doesn't matter. So less melanin means I get lighter hair. So this is like what we have. This is sort of the blonde hairstyle. And then the other direction would be the fully brunette or fully black hairstyle. And of course, as nature is, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle for all of us. But there's a lot of stuff that we can do with that already. Then, of course, we have the roughness. So no roughness means we have this whole sparkly, fully reflective, doesn't look real at all type shader. And the other end, we have something that isn't shiny at all. Once again, the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, 0.3, 0.4. I think that is a really, really nice shine here. Oh yeah, something else just before we start filling, and maybe your results might look different than mine. There's at the top here under Epic, where mine says Epic, that is the rendering quality. So if you drop that down, if your computer isn't fast enough, you can drop that down to medium or high. Mine looks like it defaults to Epic, and we can only see these things at LOD level 0 here. So that's the highest resolution hair. We can preview what this would look like with hair. So we don't have to use grooms with this creation method. You can choose to use the cheaper hair card rendering method, and it uses a very similar shader here. So very cool, isn't it? So you can change that here as well. Preview what this would look like with hair cards. But we're going to stick with groom. So I'll untick that. There we go. Perfect. So that's roughness, that's melanin, that's the redness. Now there's also the whiteness and the lightness. And the whiteness, I think, is the stray white hairs that people develop no matter how old they are. Some of us have more than others. And yeah, this is almost like he's going gray now, but he's not old enough to have lost all his melanin. I remember I had a sports teacher who had very dark hair, and he was young. He was like late 20s, mid 20s or so. Yeah, so he looked something like this. He didn't have the Mohican, but he looked something like this. And he had a lot of these white stray hairs that were just creeping in, and it's of course no more noticeable if you have very dark hair. Lightness is related to that. It's, I think, how bright the light shining hairs are. So if you have medium amount of them, they stand out a lot. But if you go and turn the lightness down, then that is those light hairs sort of disappearing into the background. So again, I think the truth for most of us is somewhere in the middle. This is kind of nice. We get these few gray hair strands in there. It looks very, very natural. And this is just the base, so we haven't even touched gradients and all that. So we're going to come to that in a moment. So let me go leave it like this and show you the next cool feature, which is the dye color. So dye, and also notice that this happens here as well as here. So pretty cool that. So the next one is the dye color. Dye is something that is added on top of all of this. So if you had a bit of a wash, either an old lady who had a bit of a tint of purple or blue, or if you're a punk that thought, you know, hey, pink is the new black and dyes his hair, but it doesn't completely wipe out the color. It goes and adds it to the existing color that we had. So that's pretty cool. If you want less color, make the saturation less. And we can, you know, get that little bit of extra tinge. The same if you wanted to make proper ginger hair and the redness slider isn't enough, you go and use this and just use, get something like a more of a strawberry tint in here. So it's very cool. If you had something like a strawberry blonde, you could go and do that. This would be just blonde really with a bit of a wash in there. So very cool having all that flexibility. Pretty cool. And this is just the dye. So without it, just put it back to white and then you have the blonde hair again. So that is pretty cool. I want to go back into the sort of, you know, brunette-ish direction here. sort of dirt color, as we often call it. I'll leave the dye out because that's something you can add or not add on top of everything else. And let's talk about ombre. Ombre is the thing that you often see in pop stars who have a different color at the root of their hair than on the outside. It doesn't just have to be the root, so it could be like 50% of the hair is sort of blonde and then the 50% is brunette, or you have something that is mainly dark and then it goes into red or something like that. That is ombre. And that means you have, just wait a second until Unreal Engine's finished auto-saving assets here, which we have to do all the time. So ombre means if you enable it here, you have another color that gets blended into the color that you've chosen up here with the melanin slider. So let's leave U and V alone for now and just have a look at ombre color. So if you click that and we stick with our sort of red example, and I'll go into something very colorful that we see the difference, then only the top of the hair is sort of going red, and there's a sort of gradient in there in the middle, and you can do great things with that. So in our case, we have the shift 0.5 is the default. If I go and turn that down, then I get more of this color at towards the root. And if I had longer hair, then of course it would behave slightly different, I guess. And if you go to further to the top, you have that color starting only at the tips here. So very exciting stuff. But then of course we have the ombre. I'll put this back to 0.5. Then we have the ombre contrast, and that is how much the gradient is being affected. So 0 is that, very soft, but if we crank it up to 1, then we have a very harsh or harsher transition between my natural color and the ombre color. And once again, I suppose the truth, so to say, somewhere in the middle. There's also the ombre intensity, so I can drag that down if I don't want them to stand out quite that much. This is more like a wash on the outside here. They're all float values, so 1 is like 100% of the ombre color, and if we go and turn that down, then it's just being washed in there a little bit. And perhaps bring that down. It's quite exciting stuff. So U and V, I had assumed, and I'll just go and bring the intensity 100% up, 0.3 on the contrast. U and V, I had assumed is basically the position of the gradient map that is applied and where that is, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Notice, by the way, these sliders here doesn't actually, they don't reset anything to the default value. They just reset everything to 0, which is weird. So that 0 isn't the default value because that looks quite crazy. So 0.2 is what the default value, I suppose, was. But if I go and crank that up, I don't really know what happens here. It looks like the ombre is there's this different color now being added. So I don't really know what to make of it, but it's not something that makes all that much sense. V is behaves like a tint slider here. So U behaves like a lightness slider and V behaves more like a tint slider. So I don't know what that is. The labels might well change, but yeah, this is what that does. So whatever the weird default values of 0.26 were, that is something that looked okay, but hey, it's one of those, let's play with it and see what happens and see if you like the look of that hair. I'll go and leave ombre alone and switch it off again, but we can come back to that later and have a look at the next thing, which is called regions. So regions is a similar thing, but it doesn't affect the tip of the hair. It affects other regions of the hair. And I think it greatly depends on the actual hair prop where that kicks in. So the idea is the same. Let's go and pick a different color, maybe something like blue here. And you'll see most of it is turned blue, but the moment I play around with the U and V sliders here, we'll see that the blueness seems to appear or disappear in different sections. So I don't really know what to make of it. Like this here now, looks like we have some colors, but only on certain strands of hair. Whereas when I go and turn that U region further down, more and more of my hairs get colored in. I've seen this on other hair props that you literally see this tip turning a color and not this tip. So I bet that is related to U and V. So play around with that and see if you can make head or tail of it. I certainly can't, but it's, it's another option to play with. Sometimes these things, they actually go over 1. So we can try 10 here. There we go. That's quite interesting. I don't know if that's meant to happen. Yeah, but 10, 20, 50 sometimes gives you very different results. So try to, even if the slider doesn't let you go above 1, try to type it in anyway and see what happens. So yeah, that's the regions. And so the regions in this configuration, they look a little bit like highlights, but highlights is another thing down here. So I'll switch regions off again. And once again, you can put regions and ombre together, and then you get these incredible gradients here. So there's lots of funky stuff to play with. Very cool. So I'll switch ombre off again. I'll switch regions off. Let's have a look at highlights. So highlights, that's of course the thing that ladies have when they have streaks of different color in the hair that sort of blends in, both ladies and gentlemen, of course. Once again, U and V I'll leave alone. I'll pick a highlights color, maybe green, just to demonstrate. Don't know if that's going to look great or not. And then once we've got that, let's crank up the highlights intensity so that we see what we're doing. And now that we don't really see anything or anything green in my hair, let me go and play with the U and the V section. So V is 0.25 and U is 0.28, something along those lines. Let me go and drag that all the way up. See if we see something. So it hasn't happened at 1 yet. Let's try 5. So that looks like there's something happening, but it's not really green. I'm not really getting that. Let's play with the highlights blending. So it's currently on 0.5, but if I turn that up to 1, then we see that my natural hair color comes through and the blending seems to happen in some of these places. Again, it's not green. I don't really know what that means, but hey, let's go and try 2. Okay, looks like 1 on blending was a little bit better. Let's play with the V value and see what effect that has on our highlights. It looks like V doesn't really do anything. Oh, and then of course that's variation. So as we do that, then we see that these darkish blotches, they now go different places. I don't really know how that is related, nor do I really see the highlights that I thought we're gonna get, but maybe you have better luck than I do. So play around with all these sliders and see what you can come up with. The cool thing is though, you can bring them all together. So we can use this ombre with the highlights and with a bit of regions here. And we can also add some dye to the whole affair. So maybe something like yellow. Let's see where that ends up. Does that even do anything? Yeah, but incredible styles, incredible versatility that you can make here. Let me go and show you this in all its glory, maybe with different lighting rotation here. Pretty cool how that reacts to light. And of course, it's free. There's a ton of variety and it has physics applied, real-time physics as you use this either in animatics or in real-time gameplay. It looks pretty cool. Let's have a look at one more hair because we don't have that many. Let's go back to selection and let's try the afro here. If I go and do that, or actually the receding hair, let me show you the receding hair. Then we can build something like a grayish sort of character. Sadly, whatever you've done to the shader doesn't get transferred to this hair. So the shader resets and you have to start fiddling all over again, which is a bit of a shame. Let me go with receding here. Although this is a really nice hair, so have a lot of fun playing with that. It moves. So this is like receding hairline. You have baldness on the top here. And let's go and give him sort of a gray hairstyle here. So once again, under details, what I would do here is probably reduce the melanin down. Redness sort of depends, has he had that to begin with? Let's say he had, like my grandfather had mostly gray hair, but there's sort of yellowish tinges that remained. And then we'll add some whiteness to this. That replaces some of these hairs. And then we get these incredible little strands here. And then we'll crank the lightness up a little bit. That is him all. So maybe even reduce the redness and the melanin even further. And then you've got this mostly gray hair. And then if you wanted to do more of that, if it's not quite ashen enough, you can go and add, this is what old ladies do. You just add a little bit of blue to that. I don't know which hairdresser originally thought that was a good idea, but that's concept that they used to use in white bed sheets back in the day. Do you remember that? There's this thing that you put into white stuff, and if it reflects blue light, just a tinge of blue, it looks whiter than white. It's just an old trick, really. Oh yeah, if we also give him, let me go and put the light sort of closer from the front like this here. If we also give him eyelashes and eyebrows now, which the guy doesn't have, then we can go and make those match. So once again, back to selection here, we'll close down the grooms and give him some eyebrows. Once again, I don't really know the difference between all of these, but let's go and use these ones. There's probably really bushy ones. I'll just pick one at random here. It looks like I've picked one that doesn't work. Let's go and pick the first one. Maybe that works. Yes, look, that worked. And so that these match, we can go and adjust their color. Let me go and give him some eyelashes as well. They're down here. First one should maybe work. Let's see. But yeah, let's see if we can get the eyelashes and also maybe a little bit of a mustache to match, to blend that color. So this is dark. This also has the default color. Eyelashes, mustache. Let's go and use the first mustache here. It is not quite the Hercule Poirot mustache, no, but it is mustache nonetheless. Okay, so now you'll see that we have more options here. So the first one is in fact the eyebrows. Then we have the eyelashes, then we have the receding hair here, and then we have the mustache. So make sure when you're making changes, you're on the correct thing, because the shader looks pretty much the same in everywhere you go. So let's start with the eyebrows here. And we have the melanin and dye only, so there's a few less options. So we drag down melanin to make that a little bit lighter, and then we add some whiteness like we did before. I wonder if there's also a way to save this out as a preset so that's more reusable, but je suis désolé, I do not know right now. So that sort of blends in. Often eyebrows and eyelashes are less gray than the rest of the hair. Trust me, I know what I'm talking about. So that's the eyebrows, eyelashes. I might just try to make them a little lighter here. Yeah, I would imagine the performance is going to get improved a little bit so that we have things like as you drag the slider, the change already appears in the viewport. Right now it's a little bit weird that you have to go and left click and drag, then let go, and only then will you see the change appear. Maybe that's enough, but certainly with some gray elements creeping in there. And now let's go and have a look at the mustache, aka the tash. That's now this one here. This is the hair, so we're going to not touch that. Let's say it used to be like this, so a little bit more melanin, less redness, and then more of the whiteness to get that straggly hair, but not too much. Maybe he's tried to dye it, and of course dyed it with the wrong color. That's another thing you can override it. Dye it with something like a dark gray, and then we see somebody who's tried his best to make sure that tash didn't look too out of place. Sadly picked the wrong color at the ladies department at Walgreens. So there we go. That's how we can play with hair. Pretty cool, I have to say. And all of this, and I say this again, is completely free, and we can play around with this. And these are just some of the assets that are included. I'm so looking forward to Metahuman Creator when the full release hits. I think it's scheduled for 5.7, so at that point we're probably going to see all these thumbnails working here. But play around with it until then in the 5.6 preview. All you need, as I said in my previous episode, is the Metahumans plugins, and then you can get started designing your people and making them wander around, and hopefully you're gonna have lots of fun making hair, making people, and hopefully at one point also making clothing with Chaos Cloth. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had fun, and stay creative. Take care. Bye-bye.